So now we're going to delve into one of the ways that we can represent oligopolists. We're going to use the most common example of this type of mathematics called the prisoner's dilemma. And the prisoner's dilemma is a type of what's called game theory. So game theory is a branch of mathematics that analyzes situations in which players must make decisions and then receive payouts or payoffs, based on what they and other players do. That's where the interdependence comes in, right? And this prisoner's dilemma is specifically a type of game theory. It's a scenario in which the gains from cooperation are larger than the rewards of pursuing self-interest. And we're just going to use selfish and self-interested in the same way here, right? So the gains from cooperation are greater than the rewards from being selfish. That's the defining characteristic of a prisoner's dilemma game theory setup. So let's jump into it. All right, so the prisoner's dilemma sets up like this. We've got prisoner A and prisoner B, and they each have two choices. So the first choice that they can make, so they've both been, they were co-conspirators in a crime, and they're being interviewed, they're being interrogated rather, and they have the choice to remain silent, which would be to cooperate with the other prisoner, right? So if they were to remain silent by cooperating with the other prisoner, and if let's do different colors, probably be good. Let's have prisoner A be green, and we'll have prisoner B be blue. And so we've got remain silent, and then prisoner B also has the choice that they can remain silent or cooperate with the other prisoner. So let's say they had a deal going in saying, hey, if we both get, arrested, don't say anything, don't admit to anything, just take your lumps and move on, right? And so prisoner A, if they were silent and the other person remained silent, would get 2 years. prisoner B would also get 2 years. So again, the outcome for prisoner A has to do not just with what prisoner A decided to do, remain silent, but it has to do with what prisoner B decided to do, also to remain silent, in this particular, what we would call a payoff square. So this particular payoff has to do with prisoner B remaining silent and prisoner A remaining silent. The other option that they have is that they can confess. Right? So confess would not be to, to not cooperate with the other player, the other prisoner. And so if you were to confess as prisoner A, but prisoner B were to remain silent, well, you would get a deal of 1 year, while your co-conspirator would get 8 years. If both of you were to confess, then prisoner A would get 5 years, and prisoner B would also get 5 years. And then the last thing that we have to figure out is what would happen to prisoner A if they remained silent while prisoner B confessed. Well, A would get 8 years. And if B confessed but A remained silent, then B would have cut a deal and they would only get 1 year. One of the things that we can easily see here is that this matrix is symmetrical. All prisoners' dilemma problems are going to be symmetrical. So if prisoner A gets a year by cutting a deal when prisoner B doesn't, then that means that prisoner B must get a year when prisoner B cuts a year, but prisoner A doesn't. Similarly, if A gets 8 years when they remain silent but prisoner B confesses, B has to get 8 years when prisoner A confesses and prisoner B remains silent. So questions on just the setup?
We are not going to be using the modern advanced version of the prisoner's dilemma, which accounts for the future value of cooperation. Yes.
We're not going to do that.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is a one-off, a one-shot game. So the way that we're going to solve this is we're going to take a look at what if prisoner B decided already to remain silent, and we are prisoner A. So that's why I put this ruler over here, just to cover up the option of prisoner B even confessing. So you can use your hand on the exam, right? You can use your hand on the screen, but just get rid of it. Get rid of that extra information. So if you cover that side up, what's prisoner A going to do? Assuming that prisoner B remains silent, prisoner A can remain silent and get 2 years, or they can confess and get 1 year. Well, prisoner A is going to want to confess and get 1 year. This is a golf situation. Less jail time is preferable to more, right? And then we're going to flip around. We're going to say, okay, what if prisoner B decides to confess? Prisoner A is going to choose between remaining silent and getting 8 years, or confessing and getting 5 years. So prisoner A is going to confess in that scenario as well. So as a result, since both of these, since the scenario where prisoner B remains silent, prisoner A confesses, and when it's the scenario when prisoner B confesses, prisoner A confesses, since both of them are the same what we would call strategy, that means that prisoner A has a dominant strategy to confess and not cooperate with prisoner B. Questions on how we figured that out? We covered one half. We compared the two payoffs that A could get given the two strategies that they could choose. Remain silent, get 2 years. Confess, get 1 year. 1 year is better than 2 years because it's jail. I want the least amount of it. And then over here, if prisoner B decides to confess, prisoner A chooses between confessing and getting 5 years or remaining silent and getting 8 years 5 years is better than 8 years. They're going to confess in either scenario. So they have a dominant strategy of confessing. Now we're going to do the same thing with prisoner B. We're going to say, okay, what if prisoner A has decided to remain silent? We're going to cover up the confess option, and we're going to take a look at prisoner B's choices. If prisoner A decides to remain silent, prisoner B can either remain silent and get 2 years, or they can confess and get 1 year. They're going to want to confess because 1 year is better than 2 years of jail, right? Then we're going to cover up remain silent. We're going to say, okay, what if prisoner B confesses? Prisoner B confesses, what if prisoner A confesses? If prisoner A confesses, prisoner B is going to choose between remaining silent, getting 8 years, or confessing and getting 5 years. They're going to go ahead and they're going to confess 5 years is better of jail time than 8 years. And so then we're going to take the ruler away, and we're going to say, okay, since these are both in the same strategy for prisoner B also has a dominant strategy to confess. And so here's the situation where, it would be wonderful for them, right? The best payoff would be for them to cooperate with each other. The best collective payoff, right? They would have 4 years of jail split evenly between them, compared to if they confess and they confess, there's 10 years of jail split evenly between them. And if one of them confesses and the other one remains silent, it's 9 years of jail split very unevenly, right? So the best collective solution is for both of them to remain silent, but the incentives are such that both of them have dominant strategies to confess. And so without any enforcement mechanism, despite the fact that remaining silent, this is going to be the best outcome for both of the players, we're going to end up at this outcome down here. Which brings us to our second terminology of game theory that we're going to talk about today, which has to do with a Nash equilibrium. So because of the fact that we learn dominant strategies and we learn Nash equilibrium on a prisoner's dilemma scenario, it's always the way it's learned, it's easy for us to get confused that the Nash equilibrium is where the dominant strategies intersect, right? Yes, that is where the dominant strategies intersect for this particular example, but a Nash equilibrium is not defined by dominant strategies. A Nash equilibrium is talking about, does any player have an incentive to unilaterally deviate? So if you find yourself in this scenario and you're prisoner A, would you rather go back in time and deviate from your choice, from your strategy of confessing to remaining silent? If only you changed your strategy from confessing to remaining silent, you would go from getting 5 years of jail to 8 years of jail. So you don't want to do that. So there's no incentive for prisoner A to deviate from the current strategy. And then we would take a look at prisoner B. We would say, okay, if this is where prisoner B is, and they had a time machine to go back 15 minutes, would they go back and remain silent instead of confess? Well, remaining silent would get them 8 years. Confessing would get them 5. So there's no incentive for prisoner B to change their strategy either. So an equilibrium in game theory has to do with, is it going to last? Is it steady? Is it something that if somebody could go back in time and change, they would? And so it's a bit different than the notion of equilibrium that we have in supply and demand models, right? And again, we oftentimes will get confused and think Nash equilibrium, oh, that's where the dominant strategies intersect, because in this very bare bones, basic microeconomic, principles of microeconomic approach that we take to game theory, we really don't teach you much else besides that. But dominant strategies have nothing to do with Nash equilibrium.